Our story begins in 1884, where something known as the Berlin Conference took place in Berlin, Germany. In this conference, major European powers, along with the United States, all gathered to discuss one topic: the fate of Africa. While colonies had been established there in the past, Africa was seen as an untapped gold mine by most European leaders, and it was easily desirable to be exploited. With the advent of an industrial revolution that caused the technology to cross harsh desert environments possible, it was now possible for Europeans to explore the deep interiors of Africa, and for that matter, colonize the crap out of the place. Everybody entered the conference with their own territorial ambitions, and they were determined by the country's ability to enforce said claims, and if they had claims there in the past. Britain, for example, wanted all of these lands, basically wanting to create a land corridor that would link up their southernmost colonies, as well as Namibia and Eritrea, and most notably here, Tanzania. They didn't end up getting Eritrea or Somalia, and they actually got a bit more land, including Nigeria, but they never got a hold of Namibia. France, on the other hand, believed that they had claims to a whole lot of land. They wanted pretty much all of Algeria, which they had been in for a long time, Mauritius, and basically the entirety of the Sahel region. Most importantly for this video, though, they wanted the modern-day Democratic Republic of the Congo, which they did not get a hold of, because other people desired it as well. You see, Britain worked very hard to stop anybody who wanted a straight through line from one end of the coast of Africa to the other from getting what they wanted at all. And this is because they didn't want their southernmost South African colonies that they already had to be cut off. Germany initially wanted a straight through line of Tanzania through the DRC and out the other side of the coast. They did not get this at all because Britain lobbied hard into stopping it. Portugal initially wanted the whole northern half of Africa according to the Treaty of Tordesillas, but there was no way in heck that Britain was going to let that happen. So they adjusted it to having a through line of Mozambique to Angola to link up their two colonies, but Britain also blocked that. So at the end of the day, this is what they'd end up getting. Take it or leave it. But now, this left this contentious territory. Britain didn't want France to get a hold of it, and they weren't going to let Germany get a hold of it. So, enter the third party, King Leopold II of Belgium. He bamboozled everyone into giving him the Congolese territory because he tricked everybody into thinking that he was involved in humanitarian work there. This was a big fat lie, and the Congo became his private property. He personally owned it and not Belgium, and it was called the Congo Free State, which he used for exporting rubber, minerals, and committing some of the worst atrocities humankind has ever seen. Eventually, it was taken from him in 1908 and given to Belgium outright and became the Belgian Congo, where they still committed atrocities, but they were less open about it. So I know you're all thinking, how did we get from this to a news broadcast that began with a man's face descending through the clouds? And I guarantee you, none of you were asking that question, but I'm asking it, so deal with it. Welcome to tonight's history lesson. Today we go back in time to the Cold War to look at the tumultuous history of a short-lived state and how it plunged Africa into World War, Zaire, and the man who ruled it. The eccentric and greedy African dictator Mobutu Sese Seko, and his stupid, gaudy freaking hat. To truly understand the horrors that caused the independence movements to gain so much traction, one must really look back and observe the Belgian Congo for all the atrocities that were committed. While free on paper and supposedly above being a mere colony, nothing could be further from the truth. The people of the Belgian Congo were routinely exploited, used as slave labor to harvest materials and reach quotas. Their families often held hostage if quotas were not met. Belgian soldiers were required to present severed hands as proof that munitions were not being wasted on hunting. This resulted in the Congolese people cutting off their hands and paying the soldiers in payments of severed hands. The people were whipped, beaten, starved, and tortured, forced to work the grueling process of harvesting rubber. Many more would die in mines, harvesting minerals, dying in explosions, or being crushed by falling rocks. People had little to no government representation, as all the resources of their home were strip mined for all they were worth. They were considered second class to Belgian citizens, and children were frequently separated from their families, and many did not survive. When World War II rolled around, the whole world got a taste of firsthand the true horrors of ethnic nationalism and rampant imperialism with the Germans' regime. The former colonies of the world fell like dominoes, spurred on by a rampant activism and harsh condemnation of ethnic nationalism. The great superpowers of Europe lost their colonial empires one colony at a time. Their days as global powers that could sway the stage of the world over. The United States emerging dominant and powerful over its past betters. The rule of Europe was over. The American world order had begun. It is now 1960, the height of the Cold War, and initially the Congo was supposed to be independent from Belgium over a grace period. However, the president, Patrice Lumumba, was arrested, so Belgium instead gave the DRC its independence in 1960. And it immediately caused problems. Immediately after its independence, something called the Congo Crisis began, in which there was a political upheaval period in which no one could decide who would rule the country. So they split up. And just like every single Cold War story, can you guess who came in to support each side and what the ideology they were fighting over was? The USSR and Belgium. You see, Belgium was initially going to have an agreed-on transition period, but all this changed when the DRC's president was arrested for incurring protests in the capital. This left many problems like ethnic nationalism and rampant militarism to be unsolved by the time Independence Day rolled around. In the first week of July in 1960, a mutiny had broken out within the army, and violence between black and white citizens erupted onto the streets. Belgium, not wanting to see ethnic Belgians slaughtered, quickly mobilized its army and attempted to protect the fleeing white civilians. On July 11th, the culturally and ethnically distinct Katanga province seceded away from the rest of the DRC and became a breakaway republic. Belgium established support with the breakaway republic and continued to fight for its secession. At this point, the UN deployed peacekeeping forces to try to maintain some semblance of unity in the DRC. However, the Secretary General of the UN at that time, Dag Hammarskjöld, refused to use these troops to aid the central government in Leopoldville. After being freed from his arrest and not soon after winning his first election, things went really bad. So Patrice Lumumba crapped his pants and called in the USSR for help. The Soviets responded by sending any amount of financial and weapons support, as well as sending their top military advisors to assess the situation. Things became an absolute disaster. There were 3 regions of the DRC all fighting against each other, along with South Kasai that was still underneath the control of Belgium at the time. The involvement of the Soviets made things even worse. It split the nationalist factions between Lumumba and Joseph Kasavubu. The Soviets didn't make anything better because they started to try to spread communism to the place, like they always do. And then when you least expect it, the junta strikes. An army major named Mobutu Sese Seko kicked out the Red Army's military advisors and overthrew the government. He said, "Screw both the Soviets and the Belgians, I'm establishing a government under my control," and basically kicked Lumumba to the curb. By his own words, Mobutu's politics were neither left, nor right, nor even center. I guess there's a fourth thing on the political compass, and he was kind of right, because it was fascism. Mobutu took a very hard stance against communism and the USSR, which earned him the support of the United States. We're just going to ignore the fact that Mr. Lumumba, who was kind of a corrupt president to begin with, was captured by rebels, tortured extensively, shot in the head by a Belgian soldier, and then his lifeless corpse was tossed into a river. Because this was weird. Mobutu just sold the guy to the Katangan rebels, and then the Belgians shot him for some reason. It was weird. The Belgians have actually since apologized for their role in his execution. Then things got even worse when a free republic of the Congo seceded from Mobutu's government. Under the leadership of Antoni Gazinga and getting support from the Soviet Union, they started attacking both Mobutu's government and Katanga at the same time. They, however, were utterly steamrolled by 1962. Then the UN general died in a plane crash. No, trust me, this is important. With the previous pacifist guy dead, the UN was now fully committed to deploying troops into the DRC. UN task forces landed at Stanleyville, the capital of Gisinga's government. And by the start of 1953, both South Kasai and Katanga were dead at the hands of Mobutu's government. But before elections in the new country could even be planned, the Chinese, a Maoist militia by the name of the Simbas, started rising up in the east of the country. Being a communist revolution, they found support from the Soviet Union, China, and Cuba. But on this occasion, the United States had the balls to actually start deploying troops. And we're just going to point out that before asking for help in the Soviet Union, Lumumba went over and asked the United States, Belgium, and the UN, all of whom said no. The Simbas declared a communist People's Republic of the Congo, but the United States invaded Stanleyville and utterly steamrolled them, and the Simbas were no more. So hooray! Kasavubu now has a fully independent DRC. Except they don't, because when the elections rolled around in 1965, there was a stalemate between Kasavubu and Tesofe. This created a political gridlock in the country that allowed no one to go anywhere. But that all changed when they least expected it, because Junta II, Electric Boogaloo. Mobutu seized full control of the government and ditched the name the Democratic Republic of the Congo because it's not fitting for a fascist nation, and somehow the Republic of the Congo was already taken, and he wanted a more authentic African name. So in attempts to be more authentically African, he changed the country's flag to a hand holding a torch and named the country Zaire, meaning river. Although that's actually a Portuguese mispronunciation of the Congolese language, but what does he know? Mobutu now had full control of his fully independent Zaire. It encompassed all of the former territory of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and he continued to get support from the United States so long as he continued his harsh stance against communism. Mobutu initially promised a return back to democracy in the course of 5 years, but that would never end up unfolding. So Mobutu shifted his attention to trying to solidify his new country in the world. With a population of over 23 million, he had the most populous Francophone country in all of Africa in his hands. He wanted to create an African state that was free and pure of all of the influences of colonialism. So Mobutu immediately suspended the parliament and started his political campaign of Make Africa African again. He changed his name to Mobutu Sese Seko Nkuku Mbendu Wazabanga, which translates directly to the all-powerful warrior who, because of his endurance and inflexible will to win, shall go from conquest to conquest, leaving fire in his wake. Just rolls off the tongue. In fact, he made it outlawed for anyone to have a Western name, and made it so that everyone had to change their Western name to a more authentically African name or risk imprisonment for 5 years, and also banned anyone being baptized that didn't have an authentic African name. He also banned people from using Western vernacular, banning the usage of monsieur and madame, and insisted that they just call each other citizen. Essentially, he forced everyone in the entire state to be non-binary. Mobutu frequently played musical chairs with his cabinet of officials, frequently rotating them around so that they were never in any one position at any given time. The person who was the Minister of Health 1 minute could all of a sudden become the Minister of Commerce the next. And this could be no less than a month apart. He was also a very big thief, having once said, "If you are going to steal a little in a nice way. But if you steal so much to try to become rich overnight, you will be caught." I guess that's wise advice. He would have incompetent government officials tortured routinely before he would then promote them to a new area of working. So I guess he just gave them a little bit of torture to keep them on the edge of their feet. There are some accounts that claim that he forbade others from wearing his iconic leopard print hat, but I can't find any rock-hard evidence to substantiate this claim. Mr. Mobutu also banned traditional Western suits and made his populace wear what he called the abacast, which is a sort of suit jacket that Chairman Mao kind of beat him to the punch with. But with his new country at the ready, it was time for Mr. Mobutu to introduce Zaire to the rest of the world stage. In 1974, Zaire would get its chance,
and they were chosen to host the legendary Rumble in the Jungle boxing match between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali. Don King arranged the fight with his fellow businessman Jerry Masuki, who agreed to take his record label's showcase group, the Fania All-Stars, to the venue. Don King managed to get Muhammad Ali and George Foreman to sign contracts saying they would fight for him in exchange for Don King receiving a $5 million golden purse. As you might expect, back then, this was a lot of money. This prevented top boxing promoters from even touching the match. And to make matters worse, the United States would not agree to host such an event on their soil. So King began to seek another country to host such a legendary boxing match, and he managed to convince Mr. Mobutu that the publicity would be good for his country.
And the purse would in part be paid for by Muammar Gaddafi, the Libyan dictator, according to a TV interview.
So Mr. Mobutu agreed that the match could be hosted in Zaire and that it would be broadcasted on international television. The group arrived in Zaire as expected. However, George Foreman sustained an injury during training that pushed it back by 5 weeks. But this was no problem, as Mobutu invited them to see what other sights the rest of the country had. But this led to a very special event, Zaire 74, a music festival that was originally supposed to promote the Rumble in the Jungle fight. Despite the fight's postponement, the music festival went ahead, and it was designed to celebrate Black artists and Black cultural power. 80,000 people would attend the 3-day live music event, featuring performances from James Brown, B.B. King, Bill Withers, and the Spinners, along with many more. The fight between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali was legendary. It has been called possibly one of the greatest fights in the history of the sport. It was a major upset, with the undefeated George Foreman being defeated by the underdog Ali with his rope-a-dope strategy, having won in the 8th round. Nearly 60,000 people came to witness the event, and it was seen on live television.
It is still considered to this day one of the most watched television events of all time, having millions of views worldwide. Muhammad Ali and George Foreman would become the best of friends afterwards, and it cemented Muhammad Ali's rise to stardom. And Mr. Mobutu profited greatly from it, with the match earning his country over $100 billion. What happened with that money was up to him. The reality is, Mr. Mobutu was a very greedy man. Estimates of his personal wealth range from $50 million to as much as $5 billion. He amassed this wealth through exploiting his own country, exploiting the economics of Zaire, while also exploiting the aid sent to him by his foreign allies on the world stage. The United States, France, and Belgium all built really strong ties with him due to his rather harsh stance against communism. His rule has been called a kleptocracy because of his unashamed desire and ability to steal from his own people. One of his favorite pastimes to do with this money is to take lavish shopping trips to Paris on the Air France's Concorde. This left Zaire to suffer massive inflation and extreme currency devaluations. He wasn't the only one that was stealing stuff though, as the musical chairs game encouraged his cabinet of ministers to do the same. Because ministers never knew how long they would be positioned in one single seat, they would frequently steal as much money as possible to try to get as much done before they would inevitably be shuffled around again. Between November of 1965 and April of 1997, Mobutu shuffled his cabinet no less than 60 times. It was so bad that in 1970 it was reported that Mobutu stole 60% of the nation's entire budget that year. This created a country that ran off of institutionalized corruption at nearly every level. Mobutu initially nationalized Congolese resources and foreign firms to give the once European-owned resources back to the people. But in most cases, he only gave control of these firms to his own relatives, who quickly exercised their own forms of corruption. And they would just make off with company assets, stealing them left, right, and center. The Arab oil shock of 1973 proved to be disastrous for the forming country, though. One of the consequences of which was that the price of copper around the world dropped by 50%, which was disastrous for Zaire, as that was one of their main exports. The country went from prosperity prosperity to bankruptcy overnight.
This turned Mobutu towards the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, to find help for the economic disaster gripping his country.
However, the IMF refused to touch all the corruption in Zaire with a 39.5-foot pole. So in 1974, Mobutu was forced to go to China to seek help. He returned from China wearing a Mao jacket and bearing the new title, Citoyen Mobutu, meaning Citizen Mobutu. This caused Mobutu to shift somewhat left, and he declared his intention in 1974 to radicalize the Zairean revolution. The PRC must have done something behind the scenes. And no sooner than had Mobutu given the businesses to the control of the Zaireans, he then nationalized them and put them underneath the control of the state in some kind of form of diet communism. By 1977, Mobutu's policies had put Zaire in such an economic slump that he was forced to try to woo investors back. He wouldn't get his chance, however, because that same year, something worse unfolded. By 1975, the Portuguese Empire was on its last legs. Its colonial empire of Mozambique, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea had been fighting for independence and had seen independence movements since the 1950s. While powers like Britain and Belgium were more than willing to peacefully let go their colonial empires, knowing that their days were numbered, Portugal tried to hold on to as long as they could what was essentially an already dead body. Their colony of Angola was in particular a very diverse region, filled with many different ethnic groups, the majority of whom were Bantu tribes. Differing from other European powers, Portugal actually remained quite distant from its colonial empire, its presence on the coasts of Angola remaining limited. Interactions between the Portuguese and Angolan people were limited and didn't really exceed political and economic interaction. In the 19th century, Portugal even made efforts to advance the continental interior. The biggest cause for the uprisings in Angola was not the colonialism that it found itself underneath, but more rather the intrinsic history of the peoples within the nation. Many historical claims from historical kingdoms that were in the area, such as the kingdom of Undongo and the kingdom of Matamba, resulted in clashes between the different members of the populace. After the overthrow of the Portuguese dictator Antônio Salazar, Angola was prepared to be granted independence. Angola dissolved into civil war with 3 separate revolutionary movements emerging. The MPLA was a People's Republic movement of Angola. It was formed by the Ubuntu people and supported by Cuba and the Soviet Union, as well as the Southwest Africa People's Organization Party in Namibia, the African National Congress in South Africa, the Congolese National Liberation Front, or the FLNC, which was comprised of Katangan rebels, and troops from East Germany and North Korea were also deployed. The FNLA quickly formed in opposition to the MPLA and was formed by the Bakongo people, the people that formerly inhabited the historic Congo Empire. They had gained support for their struggle for independence from Portugal, from Zaire, and Mr. Mobutu himself, who was strongly anti-MPLA. They were also briefly supported by China, but China more so supported UNITA, so they quickly pulled their funding. UNITA was formed by the Ovimbundo people and was formed by a former leader of the FNLA. They gained strong support from the People's Republic of China and the United States of America. Weird combo, I know. In July 1975, the war exploded onto the scene, with the MPLA forcing the FNLA out of Luanda, drawing UNITA to the conclusion to voluntarily withdraw its southernmost stronghold. The MPLA quickly overran many provincial capitals, capturing 11 out of 15. In October 1975, apartheid South Africa, which had been cleaning up a rebellion in Namibia, sent 2,000 troops up into Angola to support the FNLA and to prevent the MPLA conflict from spilling over. The MPLA stood absolutely no chance against the fully armed and modern military of South Africa, much less its tanks, and so they called for help. This caused Cuba, who, mind you, is an entire ocean away, to start deploying troops to Angola. And it was at this point that the main character of our story, Mr. Mobutu himself, saw his chance to shine. Mobutu saw an opportunity in Angola to install a Zairean puppet state, one that would be loyal to him. After all,
the former Congo Empire had already been in the country's north. He could profit off of trade with Angola from using its coastline to help cure his country's financial woes. And so Mobutu wasted no time. He deployed paratroopers, armored cars, and 3 whole infantry battalions into Angola. Within 3 weeks, the UNITA forces with the South African military had captured 5 capitals. But that was when the whole world found out that Cuba was maybe too dedicated to this conflict, as 18,000 Cuban troops arrived. This came despite the fact that the Soviet Union explicitly forbade Cuba from getting involved to this extent. I guess they just got a little bit too excited. The MPLA soon declared the independence of the People's Republic of Angola. But the FNLA and UNITA forged an alliance together and declared the Democratic Republic of Angola. Cuba's logistics were primitive. They loaded up their troops into Bristol Britannia aircraft and fishing trawlers. In September 1975, 3 Cuban merchant ships loaded up with gasoline, armored vehicles, and other logistics supplies started crossing the Caribbean. The aircraft carrying the troops made refueling stops in Barbados and Guinea-Bissau before heading to the Angolan coast. The troops were disguised as tourists, keeping machine guns inside of suitcases, and they packed the cannons and mortars into the plane's cargo holds. In response to the Cubans' assault, South Africa launched Operation Savannah in an attempt to capture Luanda. They succeeded in inflicting major casualties among the Cubans and pushing them out of the capital. However, by November 26th, the Cubans had essentially halted South Africa's advance. South Africa punched further into Angola, breaking the Cuban blockade with another 4,000 troops, but then Cuba responded once again, in turn pushing them back out of the capital. At this point, so many East German airmen were involved that they had to establish a completely separate base of operations, now having a force of over 2,000 men. Humanitarian aid was then being delivered to UNITA and the FNLA by the United States, made possible by an amendment to the Constitution assisted in being passed by Gerald Ford. And the MPLA's bid to register the People's Republic of Angola into the UN was vetoed by the United States. But things soon spilled over into Zaire itself. In 1977, the Congolese People's Liberation Front, the FLNC, decided they were sick of Mobutu's crap and decided they would overthrow him themselves. The MPLA did nothing to stop them, as Mobutu had been sending aid to the FNLA. 1,500 FLNC militants crossed the Angolan border into the Shaba province. They failed to capture the economic heartland of Kolwezi, but they absolutely steamrolled the Zairean army. On April 2nd, Mobutu appealed to William Etke of Cameroon, who made the plea for help known, which was then promptly answered by the French government. The French government airlifted 1,500 Moroccan forces into the Zairean capital, and Egyptian pilots flying French-made Mirage fighters beeped them back in the air. With the rebels forced back into Zambia and Angola, Mobutu loudly accused the MPLA and the Soviet Union of being involved and complacent in the attack. However, the United States paid him $15 million to shut the heck up. And things got so bad in the 1980s that the head of the CIA just decided to quit. In June 1989, Mobutu invited 18 African leaders to his palace to discuss a ceasefire to this war that had gotten really bad really fast. A ceasefire was reached, and Zaire managed to withdraw. However, the state of the country would only continue to decline. Mobutu had quickly become paranoid, as the state had been turning against him. He imposed a 50% salary cut to state employees after an attempted coup on him in 1975. And after a second invasion of the Shaba province by the FLNC in 1978 that was repulsed by Belgian and United States help, Mobutu was thoroughly humiliated as his army was steamrolled. Mobutu ended any and all support for the rebel groups of other nations and reduced the size of his army. He explicitly recruited only Ngbandi people because he didn't trust that the other ethnicities would be loyal to him. After winning single-candidate election in '77, Mobutu continued his lavish luxury lifestyle, having a personal yacht and storing a lot of money in Swiss banks. He made every news broadcast begin with a video of his face descending through the clouds for 53 seconds. Meanwhile, Zaire fell into disarray. Roads collapsed, becoming dirt-filled ruts that would become muddy when it rained. His soldiers would put up endless amounts of roadblocks to extortionate pay from the civilians of passing cars and trucks. But Mobutu continued to live it up and spend it up. He made a luxury town in Gabodlite, the capital of the Bandi ethnic region, in which he built a palace that he called the Versailles of the Jungle. He built an airport in the town that was explicitly made big enough to accommodate a runway large enough so that the Concorde jet of Air France could land. And he even owned a villa on the French Riviera. Mobutu initially wanted a monarchy style of procession, and he wanted his eldest son, Niawa, to succeed him. But his eldest son died of AIDS in 1994. Mobutu had cultivated a vast personality cult. His portraits and pins had hung in many places all over the country, giving him titles like Father of the Nation, Messiah, Helmsman, Guide of the Revolution, Founder, Savior of the People. In the Rumble in the Jungle fight, dancers could be heard chanting Sese Seko, Sese Seko. In 1975, it was once forbidden for the media to refer to anyone other than Mobutu himself by their name, instead referring to them by what they did. Mobutu even accepted $130 million from the Germans to launch their first satellite from his nation, as the Treaty of Brussels prevented them from developing and launching missile tests in Germany. Mobutu watched from a distance as their first rocket, the Otrag-1, launched successfully, but then shortly afterwards fell right back down and crashed into the ground. By 1978, 2 more rockets had been launched in Zaire and both had crashed into the ground. But despite this, Mobutu continued to publicly promote the program, believing the publicity that it brought to his country did him good, and loudly bragged that it was giving over 200 Zairians jobs. But pressure from the USSR eventually caused the program to end. With the end of the Cold War nigh in the 1990s, Mobutu agreed to give up the MPR's grip on power in May. The changing of political climates and domestic unrest that had gripped the country so hard was becoming unavoidable, and the writing was on the wall. In early May, students studying at the Lubumbashi campus of the National University of Zaire protested against Mobutu and demanded his resignation. On May 11, 1990, power was cut to the campus, while a special military unit, armed with machetes and bayonets, entered the building. 290 students were massacred. The European Economic Community, the United States, and Canada ended any and all monetary support they had been giving to Zaire. In 1991, Mobutu tried to set up a transitional government led by a coalition, but riots from unpaid soldiers disrupted these plans. But little did Mobutu know that his country's downfall and his overthrow was about to plunge nearly the whole of Africa into a war. And Mobutu was becoming increasingly more frail, a sickness wreaking havoc on him.
In 1897, Rwanda was colonized by the Germans as part of German East Africa, their colony in the region. Following the German Empire's defeat in World War I, Belgium seized control of Rwanda. The earliest group of people that lived in the country were pygmy hunters that settled the land, aboriginals. In 1500 CE, Bantu tribes migrated and settled. History debates as to which order came first, but the outcome of this was eventually the splitting of 2 different people groups, the Hutu and the Tutsi. The Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa split into 8 kingdoms, with the Kingdom of Rwanda becoming dominant in 1700. Higeli Ragubiri was one of the first kings that was majorly celebrated in the country's oral tradition, being a great conqueror that brought a period of prosperity to Rwanda. Underneath him, administrative reforms began, and the country reached its greatest extent. However, he greatly favored the Tutsi over the Hutu, and the Hutu were forced to perform manual labor. Despite these differences, the Hutu and Tutsi were culturally similar and spoke the same languages, but they would be treated vastly different from one another, from government to government. Most European powers would come to greatly favor the Tutsi over the Hutu and would rule through installing pro-Tutsi monarchs into the government. At one point, this switched, and in 1960, Belgium disposed the pro-Tutsi king and established a pro-Hutu king, and the country was granted its independence as the Republic of Rwanda, a pro-Hutu republic. With tensions growing, an organization called the Rwandan Patriotic Front was organized in Uganda in 1979, and then from 1980 onwards became known as the Rwandan Alliance for National Unity, or RANU. It formed in opposition of then-President Milton Obote, who they accused of participating in a genocide of the Tutsi people, along with his predecessor, Idi Amin, who also was known as the Butcher of Uganda. Obote actually worked with Amin to start a coup in Uganda and seize control. However, Amin soon kicked Milton Obote out, and Obote fled to Rwanda. Two of these Tutsi refugees, Fred Rwigema and Paul Kagame, joined Yoweri Museveni's Front of National Salvation. On the 1st of October in 1990, 50 RPF rebels crossed the Ugandan border into Rwanda, killing a border customs guard and forcing others to flee. Hundreds more rebels followed, dressed in the uniforms of the Ugandan National Army and carrying stolen Ugandan weaponry, including autocannons, machine guns, mortars, and several Soviet BM-21 multiple rocket launchers. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, who became president after disposing of Idi Amin, was at the UN World Summit for Children at the time, and was completely unaware that ethnic Rwandans were deserting from his army in droves. The Rwandan armed forces were numerically superior at 5,200, but the RPF had the element of surprise. The French intervened and quickly began equipping the Rwandan army with modern armored vehicles and helicopters. Their reasonings for getting involved so heavily in African conflicts was a desire to cement themselves as having an influence over the region. Uganda began setting up roadblocks in the west of the country, trying to prevent further deserters from entering Rwanda and blocking the rebels from returning back home. On October 2nd, RPF leader Fred Rwigema was shot in the head and killed, and nobody knows who did it. When news of this becoming a full-out invasion broke, Rwandan President Habyarimana requested France's full assistance. France's Africa cell responded by promising they would send troops. On the night of October 4th, gunfire was heard in the Rwandan capital. An attack by RPF commandos had begun. 600 French troops arrived the following morning, and parachute companies began dropping into the capital. And Mr. Mobutu, who was not very happy to have a war erupting so close to his country's borders, sent in the Zairean army to deal with the situation as well. Belgium also mobilized its army and sent troops into the region with the purpose of protecting Belgian citizens living in the area. This was a big, blatant lie on behalf of Rwanda. Bringing Belgium's character arc in our story full circle, Belgium's involvement immediately became a point of political controversy in Brussels. Belgian citizens were, in fact, not in danger in Rwanda, as the targets were mostly against the Tutsi people. When Belgium became aware of massacres and arbitrary arrests, they pulled all of their military in November, and Belgium ceased to get involved any further in the conflict. Belgium's days as an overseer in Africa were over. Its colonial involvement and its military aid ended. But I guess someone never forwarded that phone call to France. Mobutu's contribution was to send several hundred troops of the Special Presidential Division, or the DSP, into Rwanda. Unlike the French army, the Zairian army charged straight into the front line and began fighting the RPF immediately. This was very, very bad, and Rwanda sent the Zairians back home. From the 7th of April to the 19th of July in 1994, one of the worst atrocities committed during the Rwandan Civil War occurred. In a span of just 100 days, mass killings of Tutsi people were committed by the Hutu militias. 1 million people would perish in this event that would become known as the Rwandan Genocide. As many as 662,000 Rwandan men were murdered, and 500,000 women were assaulted. Rwandans in droves fled into neighboring Zaire in what became known as the Great Lakes Refugee Crisis. 1.5 million refugees poured into the neighboring country. Zaire was on the brink of collapse. It declined to the point where no amount of economic intervention could save it now. The writing was on the wall. The human rights concerns it brought with it caused it to be abandoned by its former allies. Mobutu had once bitterly remarked in response,
I am the latest victim of the Cold War, no longer needed by the US. My lesson is that my support for American policy counts for nothing.
But Mobutu had begun to grow frail and sickly. Something was wreaking havoc on his body. Something that would make him unable to assist in what was to come. When the Tutsi gained control of the RPF, they caused the Hutu to, in turn, flee the country. 1 million would flee to Zaire, and among them, the very group that committed the genocides.
And the ending of Zaire would come, and it would come in fire. With all that had happened in the past, Rwanda decided to take action against the many genociders who found refuge in Zaire. As early as 1995, the Rwandan government had begun forming Tutsi militias for action against Zaire. After an exchange of fire, the Banyamulenge rebellion broke out on August 31st, 1996. The goal of the rebellion was to topple the Kivu provinces, who were Hutu-dominated, and stop them from renewing their genocide against the Tutsi people. But with the instability that Zaire had faced for years, the rebellion reached the public, and hell erupted. The Banyamulenge and non-Tutsi elements all formed together under the leadership of Laurent Désert into the Alliance of Democratic Forces for the Liberation of the Congo, or the AFDL. The AFDL gained support from Rwanda, Uganda, and Eritrea. Rwanda sought territorial gains as well as eliminating the threats of further genocides and drive the refugees out of Zaire. Uganda was a firm ally of the RPF, who was the ruling political party of Rwanda at the time. In exchange for assisting in his rise to power, Museveni let the RPF use Uganda as a base for attacks. And Eritrea was an ally of Rwanda underneath President Kagame. Burundi also voiced vocal support for the rebels, so they were basically a cheerleader. Rwanda sent their own army to support the rebels that year. The Rwandan army destroyed refugee camps that the genociders were using as bases and forcefully repatriated Tutsi civilians back into Rwanda. It also captured many lucrative diamond and coltan mines that it didn't want to give up afterwards. Uganda then sent their own soldiers to support the Rwandan army and the rebels both, using its military commanders to assist the rebels in coordinating attacks on Zairian territory. And Eritrea sent one whole infantry battalion to support the AFDL. With this support, the AFDL was able to quickly capture territory along Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi's border with Zaire. This was firmly in the rebels' hands by the 26th of December, 1996. The rebels were satisfied with these gains, and there was a period of peace that proceeded for a little bit, until Angola joined the war and sent troops into Zaire on February 1997. I told you, it's like everything is coming full circle. They entered the war in an attempt to overthrow the Mobutu government because he had been actively supplying UNITA, and the MPLA were the current ruling party of Angola. UNITA forces then joined the Zairian army and assisted in fighting the rebels. But an anti-Mobutu coalition had formed, including Tanzania, South Africa, and Ethiopia. Zambia and Zimbabwe soon also declared allegiance to the AFDL. And thousands of mercenaries from Chad joined Zaire's forces. In March, Laurent's forces launched an offensive that demanded Zaire's surrender. The rebels took Kasenga on the 26th of March, and on the 2nd of April, a new prime minister of Zaire was put into place, Etienne Tshisekedi, who was a longtime rival of Mobutu. The rebels' offensives restarted in 97, and there was basically nothing left of Zaire's army. Mobutu's forces provided zero resistance against the rebels. Coming from the east, the AFDL advanced westward in two pincer movements. The north one took Kisiankani, Bondi, and Mbendaka, while the south took Bakwanga and Kitwit. But enter Sudan, who began coordinating with the Syrian army, as well as the White Legion, which was a group of mercenaries that were working for Mobutu that were made of a bunch of people from Yugoslavia. Their motivations were to stop Zaire from becoming a safe haven for the Sudan People's Liberation Army, or the SPLA, that had been fighting against the Sudanese government. The issue was that the Mobutu loyalist forces had begun collapsing so quickly and so thoroughly that no one could stop the AFDL, the SPLA, and Ugandan forces from occupying the country. Sudanese-backed Ugandan insurgent forces, along with whatever remained of Zairian soldiers and a small number of Sudanese army personnel, attempted to reach the Sudanese base at Ye, not knowing it had already been overrun by the SPLA. 4,000 men and their families were then ambushed by the SPLA and the Eritrean battalion in what became known as Operation Thunderbolt. The AFDL had advanced until they were right outside of the capital. Mobutu fled Kinshasa on May 16th. Survivors of Thunderbolt fled to Juba while the Eritrean battalion advanced all the way into the Zairian capital. They arrived exhausted, starving, and thirsty, and would have to be evacuated by the war's end. But they stormed the capital. They faced little resistance, and Kinshasa fell. Mobutu was fully ousted, and President Laurent Kabila became the president of the new Democratic Republic of the Congo. For all of 1 year. Laurent Kabila had inherited Mobutu's crumbling regime, and therefore the bad infrastructure and the economic crisis that came with it. He declared himself to be a Marxist and an admirer of Mao Zedong. He had forcefully pushed Tshisekedi into acknowledging that he had no role in the government with the help of his AFDL allies. The Congolese people grew suspicious as many foreign backers, i.e. Rwanda, refused to pull out. The Congolese people grew suspicious that Kabila was acting for foreign interests. And on the 2nd of August, 1998, the Beamulenge erupted into rebellion once again. Rwanda offered them immediate support. And in early August, a rebel group called the Rally for Congolese Democracy, or the RCD, began attacking targets on the east of the country. They quickly took control of the towns of Bukavu and Kuvira, and the now Tutsi-led Rwandan government introduced their ally, Uganda, into the fray. But Burundi retaliated, invading from the north to forcefully remove the occupying Rwandan forces. Kabila enlisted the help of Hutu refugees to fight back the Tutsi-backed government of Rwanda. On the 12th of August, an army major in the Congo broadcast a message on the radio. People must bring a machete, a spear, an arrow, a hoe, spades, rakes, nails, truncheons, electric irons, barbed wires, stones, and the like, in order, dear listeners, to kill the Rwandan Tutsis. Rwanda also then laid claim to large parts of the DRC's borders, claiming that they were historically Rwandan. In a bold move, a group of Rwandan soldiers underneath the command of James Kabarebe hijacked 3 planes and flew them to Kitonia. He landed in the government base there. There he found UNITA militias and whatever remained of Mobutu's army. In exchange for food, water, and equipment, they joined the Rwandan side of this new war. Towns around the base began to drop like dominoes as the rebels, the RDC, and the Rwandan army all combined. By the 13th, they seized the hydroelectric station providing power to the capital, as well as the port of Matadi, and the diamond center at Kisangani fell to the rebels on August 23rd. Uganda, acting in tandem with Rwanda, created their own rebel group, the Movement for the Liberation of Congo. Hutu militias and government forces put up vicious fighting in the east, but Kabila soon had to appeal to other African nations for help, as the combination of the Rwandan and Ugandan forces was becoming too much to handle. But the rebel offensive was abruptly reversed suddenly when the South African development community intervened. While many of the nations inside of it took a neutral stance to the conflict, several immediately declared their support for Kabila's government. Namibia, Zimbabwe, and Angola declared their allegiance to Kabila's government. The multi-front war began in September 1998 when Zimbabwean forces were flown into the capital. They began to settle in attempts to hold off a massive rebel advance that was nearing the capital. While fighting continued in the outskirts of the capital, Angolan forces punched into the country from the south. They punched inwards from both north of their mainland and east of their territory of Cabedina. The rebels were forced back from the capital, however, they could not be entirely defeated. Chad and Sudan declared war on the rebels the following weeks. A temporary ceasefire was signed for that year, however, the RDC was not invited, so fighting continued. On the 5th of April 1999, tensions within the RDC itself broke out once again, as there was contention between the leader and the Beamulenge rebel groups. Uganda controlled Kisangani to head a breakaway faction, the RDC Kisangani, which later on became the Forces for Renewal.
Following Kabila's assassination in 2001, conflicts would eventually cool down. But conflict in the DRC continues to this very day. Mobutu never got to see the end of it. He lived out his exile in Morocco from the 21st of May, 1997, until he died on the 7th of September that same year, already suffering from prostate cancer. Zaire stands as a lesson. A state that once had the potential to undo the wrongs of colonialism only brought forward more wrongs. Racism was fought with racism. And the lesson is, the harsh lesson, that racism is not just present of white against black or black against white, but oftentimes black against black, rich against poor, government versus people, oppressors versus oppressed, oppressed versus oppressors, communist against capitalist, East versus the West. They are all sides of the same coin. And even though Mobutu may have thought that he was ridding his country's presence of the colonial oppressors, he merely oppressed the people in his own way. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more history stuff like this, comment down below what topics you want me to cover next. Make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications. And consider joining my Discord. There'll be a link in my channel's bio, and I'll put a link in the description. Thank you all for listening, and good night.